Welcome to the Worldwide Robotic Milking Podcast with Gareth Jones of Robotic Milking Systems and John Gerbitz of Cow Corner Consulting. This is the international podcast dedicated exclusively to robotic milking topics from planning through production.
Hi, my name's Gareth Jones from Robotic Milking Systems in the UK.
And I'm John Gerbitz from Cow Corner Robotic Milking Consulting.
And this is our podcast, Worldwide Robotic Milking. We got into forages on the last episode and talked about feeding in the robots. And I think we just want to pick up where we left off, really, and get into maybe the concentrate or pellets side of things today. In the UK, what we tend to see is a lot of people just feeding one type of concentrate on if they're a sort of medium yield herd. Some might go to two concentrate types with a low and a high protein. And if they're doing a really good job, they might also do liquid feed. So that's what I'm tending to see in the UK. Interested to know what's happening with you over there.
Very similar here. My preference is to keep things simple and go with a single feed in the robot, but I have seen situations where it has worked very well, where fresh cows need a little something extra. Usually that's the first place it goes when there are two feeds in the pellet, is a base pellet plus a fresh cow pellet with a little extra energy, or maybe a different mineral and vitamin pack or some other additives. I do also see occasionally where the second feed is something for late lactation, and so there'd be a base pellet and then a late lactation pellet. I find that transition from the base pellet to the late lactation pellet is a little bit more complicated than I'd like it to be. And also there isn't that much savings by those late lactation cows are eating so much less anyway. As far as the liquid feeds, I do have a couple of farms that have had good success with this. I think molasses maybe is a good opportunity to get some extra energy into the fresh cows that maybe aren't getting quite what they need, and we can only push it so far with a starchy pellet. What form is the feed that you're providing in the robots in the UK? Is it pellets or meal, or what's the preference there?
Yeah, I'd say 80 to 90% would be bought in pellets from a feed manufacturer, which aren't going to give any problems with flow and blockages. I have seen people do their own mill and mix rations and put that through the robots. Can get very dusty, but there is a certain amount of that going on. And then the liquid feed, which we touched on. Yeah, I see more and more of that. Quite interesting. I know that some of the manufacturers now are can look at protein, butterfat, milk constituents, and also the correlation between fat and protein for individual cows to target them if they're getting into ketosis or acidosis. And if in the situation where there's ketosis going on, I believe some of the manufacturers now can automatically dose cows that are showing signs of being ketotic. That's the right word. They can dose them. They can dose them automatically with glycol. Are you finding some of that's going on in the US as well?
I do see some of that. I've had some discussions with some colleagues in the industry on this. I think in terms of preventing ketosis or in terms of bringing cows to the robot, I can see value in some of these propylene glycol products. When we talk about dosing propylene glycol, if we're doing it outside the robot, we're drenching a larger quantity of propylene glycol. Need to give a dose that is large enough to change the balance in the rumen, and so that there's a high enough concentration to spill over into the bloodstream and make a difference. And the problem that I have with some of these propylene glycol products is that feed tables are designed to spread out into small doses through the day. And so we never get a big enough single dose of a propylene glycol product to treat ketosis. We may find that preventing ketosis, these small pulses of propylene glycol can be helpful. We also may find that if the cows like it and they come to the robot more frequently and eat pellets more frequently, we'll see an impact on ketosis, but I hesitate on the treating ketosis in the robot. The idea that the system recognizes rumination and eating behavior and says, hey, this cow has a problem, we should do something about it. That's a great idea. But most of the feed tables I've seen are not set up to distribute propylene glycol in a single large dose.
Okay, interesting. Yeah. So for us in the UK, yes, it'd be concentrates, pellets fed. I'm guessing in the UK we're 80% free access, which means if you're free access, you've got to feed. And I do come from a feed background, so I have an understanding of feeding. And I know I'm going to talk liters and kilos now because I know you're imperial in the States. But my rule of thumb would be average yield, so averaging 30 liters outside. The maximum I can go to would be -7, which is 23 liters of milk. Maintenance plus 23, which I guess we're talking sort of -2 gallons of milk, something like that. And if we're going to feed for more than that, I've always, when I'm talking to farmers, say you're going to start affecting visits on a free access system. If your herd's averaging 30 liters, if you feed for 30 liters in the robot, you're not going to get the visits. So that would be my sort of rule of thumb. And as 80% of people are free access in the UK, then obviously they're having to feed. So in the US, I think you're less free access than that, aren't you?
I think we're probably still 80% free access.
Okay.
And I agree that we need to, I think I say it a little differently. I think we're getting to the same place, but to balance the bunk for about 80% of the average production, so that below average cows still have a reason to go, a metabolic need that's met at the robot, primarily energy. I think we're talking about the same thing and expressing it in different ways.
Yes.
And so I usually see, looking at the nutritionists are certainly going to have some say in how this all balances out between the bunk and the robots. If I'm going into a farm without something established, I'm going to start with a pound of pellets for 10 pounds of milk and work from there. Of course, I've got a minimum of maybe 5 pounds or 2.5 kilos that I need in order to get the cow to the robot. And as I get above 18 pounds or 8 or 9 kilos, I doubt that a cow's going to eat more than that in the time she spends in the robot. So I kind of have to work within that range.
Sure. Yeah. Anyway, I thought what would be really interesting now, John, is because I know that you've been, well, I think you sort of headed this up really, the sort of no feed regime, which I think you've worked on this with De Laval in particular. Am I right in terms of no pellets in the robot, or have you worked with other manufacturers?
So I think this has been, most of the guided flow installations in the US are De Laval. And I think, to give a little credit to some people in the US who really led this, a colleague of mine named Kelly Hutchings worked with a couple of farms. Matt Strickland is a guided flow farm in California that's 8 units, was the first one that tried it. And then Jay Heeg is a guided flow barn that actually started without pellets in Wisconsin. And so I think those three, Kelly and Jay and Matt, deserve some credit for sticking their neck out and trying this thing. And so, based on things that I learned from them, have worked with most of my guided flow herds, we've worked towards reducing the amount of pellets. And so where I would say my free flow farms are probably averaging 9 to 10 pounds, maybe 5 kilos in the robot, most of my guided flow farms would be in the range of 4 pounds or 2 kilos in the robots. And so as we've worked through this process, we've usually worked on decreasing the max per visit and controlling it more by max per visit than actually by the feed table. as we've gotten some of these farms down, I think there was a farm that I had down to about 2 pounds, and we had been at 7, got them down to 2. And at that point, the farmer said, my 2-year-olds are not maintaining condition the way they were when I was feeding more in the robots, and they're not milking the way they were. And so we have this precision feeding opportunity that even though we don't have to feed as much pellet to get cows to come to the robot, we still have this opportunity to put something back for those heifers. And in a one group TMR situation where the mature cows and the heifers are getting the same TMR, we want to get a little bit extra in for those heifers that are also growing at the same time and maybe don't have the dry matter intake that the mature cows have. We have this precision feeding opportunity that we shouldn't give up.
Sure.
But I also worked with another herd where the driver on this wasn't so much cost, it was more the difficulties they had with pellets in storage. And 3 or 4 times in the first year, they had I'm sure that the feed that was brought to the farm was good quality, but when you get moisture migrating in the bins and stuff like that, they had pellets spoiling in the bin, and certainly that shuts down visits. And so they kind of got tired of the problems they had with inconsistent intakes and inconsistent pellet quality, and they said, we want to be done. And so on that farm that had been, I believe they were at 7 pounds and initially had said we want to feed less. And so we got them down to about 4 pounds. There were some other things going on the farm that we decided to stop at 4 pounds for several months, and we needed to get some forage things, some other things squared away before we moved on. The next step was to introduce fresh cows without pellets. So the day I was there, there were 2 heifers that had freshened that day. We just excluded them from ration calculation, and they were the first no pellet heifers. And he said, if I can get these heifers to train without pellets, then we're going to go the rest of the way. And that worked well. He was happy with the results. And within 6 weeks or so, the fresh cows that came back to the robots were excluded from automatic ration calculation and nothing. So during all this time, we're continuing to reduce the max per visit. We've got it down to a 1/2 pound per visit. And so the next steps were going to be no feed at all. And we were a little bit gun shy about pulling the rug out from under the whole herd. So we took a sample of the cows between 100 and 200 days of milk. We took half of them and took pellets completely away. So we're going to see what happens with this group of cows. And if they don't respond well, we know we need to take a slower approach. And actually, the week that we did that, there were a number of things going on. There was some unseasonably warm weather in May. There was some foot trimming that didn't go as well as they hoped. And so remotely, I saw this crash, and they said, no, that crash wasn't about the pellets. These guys are doing just fine without pellets. And so at that point, we let the bins run empty for the mature cows. And it was about 2 months later that the bins ran empty for the heifers, and that was our transition to no pellets, and really didn't see a hitch in it at all. So I think the bottom line is, yeah, we can do this and we can be very successful with it, but at the same time, there are still some good reasons to feed pellets, some nutritional opportunities, some precision feeding opportunities that we give up if we eliminate the pellets completely.
Yeah.
You think that can work in the UK?
I think we're going to struggle with our forage, John. I think we are.
Sure.
I think we are. Sure. But what I'm also interested in is if you're feeding purely TMR outside, and we've got, as we know with robots, we can't group cows. It's cows from all stages of lactation in one group in order to get the most out of the robots. How then are you avoiding cows getting fat and late lactation if you're feeding, say, maintenance plus 40 kilos outside?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think we've been doing this in our parlors for quite some time. I wouldn't say everybody was doing this, but a one group PMR, cows need to be persistent enough. They need to get pregnant on time. And so to some extent, we're just replacing body condition. But for cows that don't peak where they should, or cows that don't breed back on time and we get these long lactations, that is certainly a very real risk that we're overfeeding late lactation cows. And I think along those lines, there's also the cost of these one group TMRs that when we talk about free flow barns and people get excited about the amount of pellets they're feeding in early lactation and what that costs, what we forget is we're feeding that whole herd for 20% less than the average milk production, give or take, depending on the herd.
Sure. Yep.
But we are feeding a much less expensive PMR to late lactation cows when we're supplementing the early lactation cows with pellets in the robots. So it's a metabolic thing, like you said. It's also a cost thing, and we hesitate on U.S. dairies to switch cows from in parlor situations to switch cows from a high group TMR to a low group TMR because they always drop when they move to the low pen.
Yeah.
That's just kind of a given. And in the free flow robot situation, we're always feeding a late lactation PMR, and we're
Correct.
supplementing it in early lactation. And so we are able to feed that lower energy ration to late lactation cows. It is a balance that we need to watch in these no feed robots.
And also with the no feed, are you finding is this primarily big Holstein cows, uniform herds of big Holstein cows where you're doing this?
Every farm that I am aware of, and I can't speak for all of them because I don't see all of them, but all the farms that I'm familiar with are big Holstein cows, high producing.
Yeah. And so I suppose the tendency for those to get fat as well is less. They're all of a type which are really suited to the TMR diet.
Right. These are cows that are peaking at 140 and drying off at 80 pounds. And I think this is something that the persistency in robots and the persistency of cows in general. When I was milking, we didn't worry about what to do with a cow that was milking 80 pounds at dry off. That was never a problem on my farm, but it is a problem that we see now. I think more so in robots than in parlors, but either way, when she's still making 80 pounds at dry off, we're a little less concerned about the weight that she's putting on.
Sure. Yeah. But very interesting, John.
Anything else on the concentrate side that comes to mind on your side?
I don't think there's anything sort of off the record. I don't think there's anything that's really going to be interesting or different enough for what you're compared to what you're doing. I mean, these all come from our compounds, all come from compound mills.
Pellet quality and pellet versus meal is something we might spend a couple of minutes on. I think you mentioned a minority of farms using a meal in the robots. I see some of this. One of the concerns I've seen with the meal, particularly in free flow or free access installations, is as we're wanting to get that up to 18 pounds or 9 kilos into the cows, we got to remember that cows cannot eat a meal as fast as they can eat a pellet. And this has come up on a couple of farms recently where we can pretty much count on a cow eating a pound a minute of pellets.
Yes.
We better be backing it down to 0.6 or 0.7 pounds per minute with the meal. And I was talking to a friend who had been using high oleic beans as the only robot feed and very finely processed to get the best utilization out of it. He said we just had to move away from it because they couldn't eat it fast enough. On the other hand, I have a guided flow farm that has gotten down in the range of 3 pounds, and it's given them more flexibility to feed a meal that they don't need the lead time for ordering, and they don't need the load size, and so it's been better for them to switch back to a meal. So there's a place for both, but I think we really got to be concerned about what the cow can eat and how long it takes her to eat it.
Yeah, so eating speed and milk speed, that's quite interesting as well. Yeah.
So I think that covers the forms of the pellets and the type of things that we're feeding in the robot and how they're presented. But I think we've got a whole lot more to cover on what we feed in the robot and the settings involved. So we'll continue with that in our next episode.
Thank you for listening to the Worldwide Robotic Milking Podcast, where Gareth Jones of Robotic Milking Systems and John Gerbitz of Cow Corner Consulting share their insights on robotic milking around the world. Join us again for the next episode, and be sure to like the show where you listen to podcasts.